Welcome to the Awaken on Purpose podcast, where each week you'll hear inspirational stories of heart-centered leaders who have awakened to their higher purpose and taken that leap of faith to follow their heart and make an impact in the world. Get ready to be enlightened, empowered, and transformed with your host, Jennifer Spohr.
I am really excited to share with everyone today Dr. Gleb Tsipursky as a guest on our show. He is on a mission to protect leaders from dangerous judgment errors known as cognitive biases by developing the most effective decision-making strategies via his consulting, coaching, and training firm, Disaster Avoidance Experts. A cognitive neuroscientist and behavioral economist, Dr. Tsipursky writes for Inc., Time, and CNBC. A best-selling author, his new book, available on Amazon and in bookstores everywhere, is Never Go With Your Gut: How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be on. I really appreciate it, Jennifer.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you. Can I call you Gleb? Is that okay?
That's totally fine. That's totally fine.
Okay.
I don't stand on formality.
Awesome. So tell us more about what inspired you actually to do the work that you're doing today.
Well, what inspired me to help people avoid decision disasters in all areas of life, especially in business, was seeing my parents, my childhood. My parents made a lot of bad decisions with each other in their relationship. So I saw them having a lot of conflicts with each other. They were both people who felt very confident that they were right. When they felt something, that meant it was right. It's the typical gut reaction. My gut is right, therefore I'm right. Decision-making style that a lot of people have, trusting their intuition and resulting in a lot of clashes and conflicts with other people who trust their intuitions. And so my mom would like to, she liked nice clothing. And so she would buy a $50 sweater. And my dad was kind of a cheapskate. So she'd come home and, he'd yell at her and say, no sweater should be worth over $20. And then they'd be off in another round of fighting over this stupid little stuff that already as a kid I saw was not really helpful to fight over. So that was one thing. And then they had a whole series of fights, which I won't go into, over all of that, which shaped me as a kid. But they also had this one big blowout fight when my dad, so he was a real estate agent, and he had a variable income based on commissions. And there was this one time when he hid some money from my mom, when he made a lot of money, and he hid it from my mom, and so he didn't make a lot of money. And so he bought an apartment elsewhere using his connections as a real estate agent, leased it out to some people. And then in a couple of years, when she found out, she was very mad. She was very pissed. They had a huge, big blowout fight, and they actually separated for a while. And I lived with my mom, so I didn't see my dad very often at that time. And so it was pretty sad for me as a kid to experience that. Now, finally, they reconciled, but she could never really trust him again. So having that experience, I saw that my parents weren't gods, that adults made terrible decisions when they went with their gut and trusted their intuition like my parents did. And I started looking around me, and as I grew up, so that was more when I was a teenager. As I grew up, I came of age in the dot-com boom, 1999. So I was 18 in 1999 when the tech leaders were partying like it's 1999, for those who remember that Prince song. And then in just a couple of years later, there was the dot-com bust when I was 21, 2002. And so they were in the front pages of the Wall Street Journal for all the right reasons, and then in the front pages of the Wall Street Journal for all the wrong reasons. And those leaders who were celebrated for making wonderful gut decisions and following their instincts and trusting themselves heroically in 1999 were now castigated for being losers and zeros in 2002, even though they made the same decisions. So that was an example of how even the biggest heroes of the biggest industries make terrible decisions when they followed their intuitions. Even worse were the leaders of Enron, WorldCom, and Tyco who followed their gut reactions to commit accounting fraud and hide their losses using fraudulent accounting methods. That was a completely irrational set of behaviors. I mean, in just a 1 year later, 2 years later, all of that fraud was uncovered. It was never going to stay hidden, and they ended up on the front pages of the Wall Street Journal in handcuffs. But that totally irrational decision making, it didn't buy them anything, but except a year or two of bonuses, of extra bonuses. They didn't really need that money, and they ended up serving very long jail sentences and losing a lot of money. So that was pretty terrible for them. And I saw that people made horrible decisions when they followed their intuitions, and I wanted to see what can we do better. So I started studying decision making, and then started training, consulting, coaching on this topic. I started getting expertise. Eventually, I went into doing academic research on this topic of decision making. How do we make good decisions? What causes us to make bad decisions? And I went into academia. I spent 15 years there doing research, and then I spent over 20 years as a consultant, coach, and trainer. So that's all combined, my experience of consulting, coaching, and training for business and nonprofit leaders with cutting-edge academic research in cognitive neuroscience and behavioral economics. That's my area of expertise, how we think and behave in economic situations. In my newest book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters.
Wow. So interesting. When I think about intuition, I actually have a very different point of view on intuition. I feel like our intuition is actually neutral, not driven by emotion, more of one of the ways that our soul speaks to us. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that is that that's not how people understand it. That may be how you understand it, but when people understand their intuition, when you tell people to follow their gut, what they hear and what they understand is do what's comfortable for me, do what I feel is right. That's what intuition means to the large majority of people when you talk to them. And that's what the research shows people overwhelmingly. That's what they understand by intuition. When they say, what's my intuition? It's what I feel is good. It's what I feel is right. And when Bernie Ebbers, the leader of Enron, felt that it was right to use accounting fraud to hide his losses, his company's losses from the dot-com bust, he followed his intuition. He followed what he felt was right. And he fell into a whole lot of trouble by following his intuition. Same way, we look at going with your intuition, trusting your gut is the probably the most common widespread business, is not probably, according to research, it is the most widespread business advice and decision making. And it's led to terrible results. Look at small businesses, look at small entrepreneurs. You can see that over the last 50 years, since the Small Business Administration has been keeping track of business success and failures, you've had the same rate of business success and failure. Within the first 5 years, all small businesses will fail. Half of all small businesses will fail within the first 5 years, in all that period. Within the first 10 years, 2/3 of all small businesses will fail, but startups. So all startups, small businesses, whatever, will fail. Now, it's, insanity has been defined as doing the same thing and expecting different results. Well, unfortunately, people keep doing the same thing, trusting their gut, following their intuitions, following the advice of Tony Robbins to be primal and be savage, and Malcolm Gladwell to blink, and so on. And people have been going and making the same bad decisions as a result of doing what they feel is right, as opposed to going outside of their comfort zone and doing the hard thing that is necessary, the uncomfortable thing, not trusting themselves, questioning themselves, saying, hey, I might feel that this is the right thing, but is it actually the right thing? Those are the kinds of questions that will actually prevent you from losing your business, losing your career, having a lot of losses. So that is the kind of thing that research shows is the important thing to do to avoid the kind of disasters that so much of us suffer when we follow our intuitions and trust our gut.
Well, we definitely want to avoid disaster, that's for sure. Making a decision to hide fraud is a fear-based decision. How could someone feel that is right? So when I think about what is right versus what might be wrong, and I think back on what is right, I think about what is honorable, what is true. So how does someone define feeling right about making a fear-based decision like that?
Oh, it's very simple. They simply feel that their fear is what indicates is the right thing for them to do. So emotions, just to be very clear, emotions drive 80 to 90% of our decisions in all cases, whether it's fear, whether it's hope, whether it's love, whether it's joy, whether it's pleasure. That is what drives our decision making, unless we choose to deliberately use effective strategies to address some of these bad emotional drivers. So when we simply follow our intuition, when we simply trust our gut reactions, we are letting our emotions rule. That's what's happening when we trust our intuition, when we trust our gut reactions, when we say, I'm going to do what's comfortable, I'm going to do what feels right. When you say you do what feels right, that is the definition of intuition. And what feels right to people is often following their fears and saying, hey, I'm afraid to do this, therefore I will not do this. Or in the case of Bernie Ebbers, what the situation was, that it all comes from where our emotions stem from. They stem from instincts, they stem from gut reactions that aren't actually adapted to the modern business environment. Not surprising, the modern business environment has been around only since World War II. Our gut reactions, our emotions, our instincts, and those are all the same thing. People use them to refer to the same thing. They're adapted for the savannah environment when we're living in small tribes of 15 people to 150 people, and we are very tribal. So that means that we are very oriented toward, in the case of Bernie Ebbers, to climb to the top of the tribal hierarchy, because when we get to the top of the tribal hierarchy, that's when we can have the most resources and we can spread our genes. So it was very important to do that in order, in the ancestral tribal environment, to survive and thrive. So we are the descendants, overwhelmingly, of those people who are very successful at going to the top of the tribal hierarchy and spreading their genes. We're literally their descendants. So we have very strong status-based responses. We don't want to lose social status. And now we know that that's a major, major driver of Bernie Ebbers and so many other entrepreneurs and business leaders. One of the biggest drivers is fear of failure. Fear of failure, fear of being seen as a loser, as a failure by other business leaders, by their peers. That's why Bernie Ebbers at Enron did what he did. And that's why so many business leaders do what they do. I mean, if you look at Boeing's leadership and the reason they got into trouble, it was because of fear of losing status, falling behind Airbus, and really driving them into complacency and cutting corners which they shouldn't have cut. And that's resulted in their disastrous decisions, which resulted in so many people losing their lives, and of course Boeing losing many, many billions of dollars, I think 26 billion the last counting, and of course the CEO of Boeing, Dennis Muilenburg, losing his job. So this is the kind of decision making that comes from following our emotions, from following our intuitions. And what we need to do is instead develop healthy, effective mental habits that involve using our head to check our gut. Sometimes our gut will tell us to do the right thing. Sometimes it will tell us to do the wrong thing, but we should never simply trust it, because we can't tell apart those ancient primitive instincts from more healthy, learned, effective mental habits. And so we need to use our head to check our gut always before making a decision that might have any impact on our business career.
There is so much I want to unpack here. I'd like to go back to doing what's comfortable, determining that what's comfortable is what's right. Doing what's comfortable doesn't always equate to a healthy decision, correct?
Because I agree.
A lot of people,
absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of people just don't want to get out of their comfort zone. So they might make, in fact, a bad decision as a result of the fear of getting out of their comfort zone.
I absolutely agree, Jennifer. And that is one of the biggest challenges with intuition. When people follow their intuition, by definition, they do what's comfortable. So that is the definition of intuition. What is comfortable, what feels right. And so when people do what feels right, they unfortunately run into a lot of trouble sometimes. And that's why you want to always check with your head before you follow your gut.
Yes, I'm finding our conversation very intriguing, and also how differently we define intuition. It's very interesting. And the concern about a person wanting to attain, social status and fear of failure, all of that is ego driven.
Of course. Yes, it
And,
definitely is.
and does the ego drive healthy decisions?
Ego drive can sometimes be used to channel into healthy decisions when it's also aligned with broader social and organizational good. So if you, for example, if you are using your ego to motivate yourself to work productively and hard while still having life balance and produce for the company, for your organization, if you're a small business owner and it drives you to work hard and be creative, if you associate yourself with kind of, hey, I want to have a good business and so on, that can be healthy. But if you let yourself, if you disassociate your ego from the organizational goal, and if you dissociate from broader social goals, so for example, if you are running a business and you do pollution, let's say, and you harm society at the cost of, you let your ego harm society, that's harmful, that's damaging. So this is where you want to make sure to use your emotions in the right manner. You want to use them to motivate yourself. That's the right place for emotions. But you don't want to use them to motivate yourself for your greed in such a way that it harms other people and harms society. And that's going to be unhealthy and problematic.
Someone who may have beliefs as a result of trauma, okay, from childhood or any other type of significant event, that could drive bad decision making, correct?
Of course can drive the bad decision making, because then when they have childhood trauma, then they feel that, hey, because of that childhood, I mean, they don't realize this is why they're feeling something. But let's say they had an issue, I don't know, well, whatever. Let's say they had an issue with separation, with attachment from their childhood. Maybe someone, their parents left or something like that. And then they will be constantly questioning whether their employees are loyal and will be really worried about loyalty. And that will result in them pushing away loyal employees, pushing away good employees in the workplace, because they will be trying to hold on to them too tightly and valuing loyalty above competence and above various other things, above ethics, above morality. So there's definitely going to be those situations, and they will feel that that's the right thing to do. They will feel, I mean, we have many examples right now in our society, unfortunately, where very prominent leaders value loyalty above all else, and that clearly leads to very negative outcomes. But this is where they feel that that's the right thing. Their feelings are telling them that, hey, loyalty is the most important thing. This is the most important thing and nothing else is right. So their intuition, what they feel is the right thing, is loyalty. That might be at odds with what's good for society, what's good for their business. So if they use their head to check with their gut, then they might act differently, but they don't. And this is one of the biggest problems with the way that people are saying, very prominent people in our society saying, you should trust your gut, follow your gut, do what's the thing that you feel is right, rather than thinking through what would be the consequences of your actions for yourself, for others around you, and making the best decision that aligns both interests.
Yeah, which again is so interesting, because I define, that gut feeling differently than you do. I am really loving this conversation, by the way. So would you say that a person's ability to make healthy decisions is really only as good as their own mindset? Because each one of us is essentially a product of our own experiences and beliefs.
I would say their mindset and their knowledge. The thing is, just like, let me give you another example. So we're talking right now about mental fitness, which is the ability to make good decisions is the essence of mental fitness. How well are you going to be able to make a good decision? How it depends on the quality of your mind. Now, let's take another example. You could say that, hey, one person's ability to be physically fit is just a consequence of their body, their genes, and their experience. Not quite the case, because, 100 years ago, we didn't really know much about what caused us to be physically fit. If you looked at doctors, so what do doctors do? There's the common doctors who were the common idea, which is very prevalent, the doctors were selling what's called snake oil, combination of cocaine, alcohol, and sugar. That's what Coca-Cola used to be, the snake oil, the cocaine, alcohol, and sugar. It doesn't have cocaine or alcohol right now, as far as I know, it just has sugar. But that was what the origin of Coca-Cola. So doctors were selling snake oil, and that snake oil is what was very popular, was very prominent. And that was caused people to be not very physically fit, but it treated their symptoms so they felt good. And they wanted that snake oil because it caused them to feel good. And so over that period of time, over the last 100 years or so, quality doctors have actually done evidence-based medicine and have found that, hey, snake oil is bad for you. You don't want to have all that cocaine, alcohol, and sugar. That's a bad thing. So right now, doctors don't recommend that. Right now, doctors don't tell you that you should go and eat that box of dozen donuts. It's very comfortable it would feel very good to us to eat a dozen donuts because in the savanna environment, it was incredibly important for us to eat as much sugar as possible, for us to survive and thrive. We are the descendants of those who were very successful when they found a source of sugar, say honeybees or whatnot. They were able to eat it, all of it, fully and thoroughly. And right now, we unfortunately have those same ingrained instincts where we are very tempted to eat as much sugar as possible. This is why there's an obesity epidemic here in America, where food companies are able to feed us as much sugar as they can stuff into us. So fortunately, more and more people are becoming aware of the problems caused by bad eating, of overeating. So the obesity epidemic is going down. Food companies are being pressured to produce more healthy food, because doctors are giving advice saying, hey, that first donut is okay, second donut is okay, and the third one is too much. So don't have more than 2 donuts or whatever. And the same thing. So right now, doctors are not giving snake oil advice. They're giving actual healthy advice based on what promotes physical fitness. Well, we're kind of in the stage of research on the mind where we were on research on the body about 100 years ago. We're really starting to understand the basics of how the mind works. And the snake oil of advice right now is going with your gut, trusting your intuition, because telling people to do what feels comfortable, what feels right, is the same thing as telling them to eat all the sugar, have the snake oil, enjoy your life. That's the kind of advice that people who are snake oil salespeople of common business advice right now, the Malcolm Gladwells of the world, the Tony Robbins of the world, that's the kind of advice they give. And so right now, if you want to have mental fitness, you need to get away from those snake oil salespeople and look at the research, the evidence-based advice. It's going to be very different. It's going to tell you that our minds, the feelings that we have, the intuitions are going to steer us in the wrong direction so much. I mean, there's a reason we have such polarization in our society. There's a reason so many businesses fail. There's a reason Boeing is screwing up, really bad decision making. This is all coming from our bad impulses, problematic intuitions, dangerous judgment errors that scholars like myself call cognitive biases. And so this is what we need to learn about and be aware of. So just like there's a structure over the last 100 years that is helping people be physically fit. Right now, we're developing that broader social structure, and my book is at the cutting edge of popularizing the mental fitness research. So it's never go with your gut, how pioneering leaders make the best decisions and avoid business disasters. It is helping people not simply rely on their mindset. So you asked about mindset. This is what I'm leading to. Not simply rely on their mindset, not simply rely on their background, but be able to actually have quality research-based advice on how to be mentally fit. Just like we now have very widespread advice on how to be physically fit. Now we're starting to actually have evidence-based research on how to be mentally fit and make good decisions in business, in our relationships, and in all other life areas.
What are your thoughts on faith? Because when you're in business, when you're an entrepreneur, right, there is risk involved. There's definitely an ability to step outside of your comfort zone, right? So how does faith come into play, in your opinion?
My opinion is that you want to have faith in your abilities, and you want to have faith in the kind of judgments you make, and that depends on improving your skills and your abilities and the quality of your judgments. So you need to have realistic faith. Now, I am someone who is very optimistic. That's just my personality trait, and that I know that, and that causes me to run into a lot of trouble very often. So I have too much faith in myself, and unfortunately, the research shows that entrepreneurs have way too much faith in themselves. Otherwise, they wouldn't start businesses. Something that you'll find is that pessimists don't start businesses. Pessimists aren't entrepreneurs, the people who are too risk averse. Optimists like myself, I run a company of 6 people doing training, consulting, and coaching and disaster avoidance experts, disasteravoidanceexperts.com. So that is something that came from my confidence and my optimism in myself. Now, what I do know is that kind of optimism causes me to be risk blind. It causes me to think to have too high expectations. It causes me to think that, hey, the grass is green on the other side of the hill, whereas it's too often yellow, and to not be prepared for all the problems that will come.
Well, we need optimists, though, right? Imagine where our world would be today if we didn't have them.
We need realistic optimists. So what I learned when I went to study this is that, hey, my optimism caused me to make a lot of bad decisions. It caused me to take a lot of unnecessary risks. So that is where optimists like myself need to learn where their optimism will cause them to steer in the wrong direction and correct for those wrong directions. So what you need to do is use that optimism, use that emotional motivation to power yourself to do hard work and make wise decisions, make effective decisions, ones that will weigh accurately risks and rewards. If you have a high reward, then you can take a significant risk. If you have a low reward, you should not take the significant risks. And unfortunately, way too many people do. We talked about business failures. There's a lot of people who go into business who should not be going into business. People who become entrepreneurs who should not be becoming entrepreneurs. A lot of the business failures within the first 5 years that I mentioned come from people who don't actually look at, they don't do market research. They don't evaluate, is there going to be an actual sufficient market for the products that they'll be selling? They don't make a strategic plan. They don't make a business plan. They don't prepare well. They just think, hey, I'm great at this. I'm great at cooking, at baking cupcakes. I know I have a friend who's great at baking cupcakes, and she's going into business. She's trying to think about going into business by herself. And I'm very strongly encouraging her to thoroughly make a business plan, see if there's sufficient market for a cupcake bakery here in Columbus, Ohio, because there are already a couple of cupcake places in town that are pretty good. So is there need for another one? And will she be successful, or will she waste a lot of money and run into bankruptcy in the future? You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that
by learning.
It can, but you want to ideally learn in the mistakes of others rather than your own. You don't want to
pioneering something.
Your cupcake is not pioneering, just to be very clear.
Not. That's true.
So that's what I'm asking. That's what I'm saying. If you're pioneering something, that means you don't know whether there's a market for it or not. In those cases, what the research shows us the best thing to do is to shoot bullets instead of cannonballs and do small experiments. So let's say if you're thinking of starting up an ethnic restaurant that you don't know, let's say a Somalian place, and there's no Somalian place in town, you might want to try starting up a food truck and seeing if there is going to be sufficient demand for your food through a food truck. And then if there's sufficient demand for a food truck, maybe you can do a pop-up. And then if the pop-up is successful, then maybe you can start up a restaurant. So that's a much more effective way than starting up a restaurant and not having sufficient demand and then closing up shop, having lost $70,000, which people do.
That does happen, yes. As far as faith, just backing up a little bit.
Yes.
I believe in a higher power. Mm-hmm. Whatever that looks like for other people. It could be God, the universe, whatever they want to call it. Mm-hmm. But I believe that everything is also a process of co-creation. There is more than just us doing our own thing and making mm-hmm. our own decisions here. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that is that any higher faith that might or might not exist will help those who help themselves. So that's very much my perspective.
I love that.
That's very much my perspective on this topic. I don't question people's current faith, whatever they might have faith in. Different people have different value sets, whether they're religious, whether they're secular, whether they're spiritual, not affiliated, whatever their value sets is. Whatever outside power or inside power they believe in, it will help those who help themselves. So that's what my focus is on when I coach people. You help those who help themselves. You focus on your role, and then you make the best of the opportunities that you have. Sometimes you'll have bad luck, sometimes you'll have good luck. Make sure that in cases you have bad luck, that you cover yourself from risks, and that in cases you have good luck, that you maximize your ability to take advantage of opportunities. And all of that relies on having a quality plan and having quality decision-making processes. So that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do have to help ourselves. Absolutely. We have to take that action, and we do have to plan. It's critical.
Yeah.
How can someone find you if they're interested in connecting with you for services or learning more about you?
Well, my book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters, published by a great traditional business publisher called Career Press, can be found in bookstores everywhere. So whether they're Barnes & Noble, university bookstores, props to indie bookstores, and of course online on Amazon, Barnes & Noble again, Books A Million, and whatever. So check those out. My research, my expertise, my blogs, videos, podcasts can be found on my website called disasteravoidanceexperts.com. Again, disasteravoidanceexperts.com. Now, there's a free opt-in for an 8 video-based module course. So 8 video-based modules, free online course on disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe. Again, disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe. Free 8 video module based course. Finally, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so I strongly encourage folks to connect with me there. Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, GLEB TSIPURSKY.
Gleb, thank you so much for joining us today. I really found our conversation intriguing.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. It's always a pleasure to talk to folks who have more of an intuition-based perspective, and that enriches the conversation, I find.
Yes, I agree. I feel the same. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you for listening to the Awake and On Purpose podcast. Please visit us and subscribe to the podcast at awakeandonpurpose.com so you never miss an episode. To learn more about how you can connect with your higher purpose and take that leap of faith to make your impact in the world, visit us at jenniferspor.com. And while you're there, be sure to join our email list for exclusive offers and a weekly dose of inspiration.